before we get to questions, we're going to take a look at samples. What is that?
Oh, you know, Kim, every time I handle this stuff and look at it, I just want to go home and cook up a passel of peanut brittle.
That's not what I had in mind, but go right ahead.
This is pine resin, or you might say pine pitch, and this is my trigger for you to remember that this is the time of year, if you have Zimmerman pine moth, to be treating probably once it gets a little bit warmer, but mid-April is the time. It's a second opportunity to treat for Zimmerman pine moth caterpillars. They're newly hatched, they've been overwintering just around the bark crevices of the pine trees, so they're very susceptible to a spray treatment. So if you've had trouble with Zimmerman pine moth branch breakage, these wonderful oozings of pitch resin, this would be the time to prepare to treat in the next week or two for the caterpillar. And again, thorough coverage with something like bifenthrin, which has a lot more longevity and can cover that longer window period of time, because we don't know when it's going to get really warm, do we? So remember that, the trigger, April 15th, for a couple more weeks, treating for Zimmerman pine moth.
Great, excellent, thanks, Jim. That is pretty cool, actually, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, Lowell, weed time.
Okay, so what I brought in this evening is actually shepherd's purse, and at this time of year, folks will quite often maybe confuse it with dandelions. One tip that I like to use is you'll see how those lobes almost come off at a 90-degree from the midrib of the leaf, and dandelions, the lobes tend to point back in towards the center of the plant. But you know, it's cold right now, and a lot of folks think that maybe these plants will, the freeze will injure them or something like that. But they're very suited for cold temperatures. They hug the ground. The ground really buffers air temperature out there, and they love days like this. They'll continue to grow and put on seed head here real quick, and we'll talk about some other winter annuals. Control of this, winter annuals germinate in the fall. A simple application of 2,4-D in the fall is highly effective on weeds like shepherd's purse.
All right, thanks, Lowell. Lauren, not a potato out of the garden, but just rotty nevertheless, right?
Oh, a potato that's got a little rot on it, and some of our viewers may have potatoes in the ground now, or maybe you've dealt with this disease in the past. This is Fusarium dry rot on potato. There are several different rots of potatoes that we can see. You can see all this discoloration down at the base. One of the keys with the Fusarium is that it is a very dry and it'll be kind of crusty as far as a rot compared to some of the soft rots that we see with bacterial diseases and even some other fungal diseases. Now, one of the things to consider with this, because it is a nice example of a Fusarium disease, just maybe as if you've dealt with the Fusarium wilts on tomatoes, for example, these are very difficult to control, and you'll have spores from this fungus that will be in soil virtually forever. So long-term rotations can help. That would mean not growing potatoes for several years. And there are some things you can treat the actual when you're planting. There are some dips and things that you can put on those tuber pieces when you're planting to avoid infection early, but it will be there later. So avoiding really dry conditions can favor this as well with that. So the other thing you could do is just try to either rotate where you're planting the potatoes or to try another system. If you're not growing a lot of them, maybe an elevated bed or some other type of growth where you're out of that soil and using fresh soil. But if you're a potato grower that you're growing quite a bit, it's going to be really difficult to manage.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Sarah, you found something beautiful in spite of the weather.
I did. I found something in a nice little protected spot on a south-facing building where there was a lot of hard surfaces reflecting heat around it. And this is a flowering quince, one of our first shrubs to bloom in the spring. And they come in pinks and whites and the kind of coral that you're seeing here and darker kind of pinkish purples. Very, very pretty when they're blooming. The rest of the summer, they're just kind of a nice mounded green shrub. So this is really the prettiest stage of this particular plant. But it is a nice breath of spring. That we know that the warm temperatures will come eventually.
And you can still purchase probably ones that are actually for the fruit set, right?
Exactly. These do, this is obviously an ornamental type of quince, but there are types that have fruits that you can actually harvest and eat. It's kind of similar to an apple, although the flavor is different, but the shape and the color are somewhat similar to an apple. So yeah, they're definitely edible.
Excellent. That's really a pretty color on that one too.
It is.
Okay, Jim, we're going with the very first set of pictures are for you. And we have, over the years and over the season, talked about bullet galls. Well, this is a pretty disastrous example. This is actually out in the Panhandle in Scotts Bluff and on swamp white oak. And the question that came in is there anything at all that you can do about bullet galls on oaks when the oak looks like that?
Well, in that, there are different reasons why some of the swamp oaks, swamp white oaks, or bur oaks become infested. One of them has to do with the age of the tree. They're more susceptible when they're younger, but others are somehow more genetically disposed to be infested by the galls. And so if you have one like this one, it's just going to be a nightmare to see what you can do about it. As far as pruning goes, I mean, it's out of control essentially, and it'd be hard to bring into control by pruning. But basically, if you have those hard bullet galls on twigs, and they aren't as heavy as that one, you can try to prune out certain areas where they're heavily infested, bearing in mind the growth, I guess the growth habit that you want to bring out into the tree. But also, I had read somewhere that there's the larger galls that have holes in them. That's where the tiny little wasp exited out of the gall last summer. And so those were successful. But those small ones that are still there, for the most part, have been parasitized by tiny little wasps that are beneficial, that would help to kind of control, or at least maintain some degree of control of those galls. So if you do any pruning, don't worry about the small ones, just prune off the large ones. And hopefully you'll be boosting the population of those parasitoid wasps that will be helping to bring that under control. Eventually, if the tree gets larger, they tend to have fewer problems with those galls like that. That one is like phenomenal. And so from our standpoint, phenomenal, but from a horticulturalist or arborist, a nightmare, just like you said.
All right, thanks, Jim. All right, Lowell, in spite of the snow cover, we have a lot of turf questions.
Okay.
This is a viewer that is really wondering about replanting with what he's calling RTF, Rhizomatous tall fescue.
Okay.
And whether, in fact, that is a good idea. He wants spread, he wants drought tolerance. What are the differences between Kentucky bluegrass and rhizomatous or turf-type tall fescue, and especially in terms of appearance? Okay. And I think, again, we have some good pictures of blade width and the differences in texture there. Yeah,
the newer turf-type fescues are, they have a finer blade and matches up more closely with Kentucky bluegrass. And a mixture, putting in a little bit Kentucky bluegrass with that is okay. The turf type tall fescue has, they will say it has rhizomes with it, but it doesn't spread as nearly as aggressively as Kentucky bluegrass does. So that mixture of a little Kentucky bluegrass in there will help fill in patches. But that being said, the turf type fescues do a better job than some of the older wider blades like that one we saw on the picture there. So the fescue is going to do better in drought conditions than bluegrass might, and they're both good choices.
Okay, so it's a good blend to use, and people really can't tell the difference.
The newer varieties, yeah, they blend together very well.
Okay, good. Thanks, Lowell. All right, Lauren, this is a viewer in Omaha. They purchased a house that has an ornamental pear in it, 30 feet tall, so they've only been there about 6 years. At the end of a rain, they saw soap suds at the bottom of the tree, and they also have noted that the crack kind of down the side of the tree. They don't know if the two are related or what is that exactly.
Did they say if they rinsed it the last time they washed it well or not?
I don't know. So isn't that interesting?
Yes, it really is, and it's not uncommon though to see that type of reaction. Actually, many trees, particularly, usually the soft-wooded trees. You see this with cottonwoods and elms a lot of times, where you'll have some soft wood in it to where you'll get some oozing, and it'll be, basically it's the sap of the tree. And if you take the sap of trees that's not conifers, many times they'll have a sudsy type reaction like that. So you're getting some leaking, particularly in the spring like this. And with that crack though on the trunk, that has me a little concerned about how long term that tree is going to be viable. So you might want to really assess that and look all the way up. And if that trunk is really damaged and split deeply to where you're getting the release of sap in the spring, you're just going to want to watch that tree, because it could be long-term a hazard tree for you, and you may want to remove it.
Well, 30 years or 30 feet is pretty big, isn't it, Sarah, for an ornamental pear?
So it could be older to where,
Right.
it may be approaching the end of its viability in the landscape.
Okay, good. Sarah, you have an ID question. This viewer, I'm not sure where they're from, but they want to know how you can, whether silver lace vine, which is the first image up there on the screen, and sweet autumn clematis are the same plant.
And no, they're not the same plant. One way you can tell the difference is the leaves, because you see here in this picture, you have what's called a simple leaf, where you have just one leaf structure with a petiole then that attaches to the stem. And then these kind of open, airy flower heads that you have with silver lace vine. And silver lace vine blooms in the summer generally. Sweet autumn clematis is a fall bloomer, and you can see that the difference in the flower structure, they have much more discrete little flowers compared to this big fluffy head that you get with a silver lace vine. They're both very kind of vigorous growers. I'd say the silver lace vine is maybe a little bit more rampant than the sweet autumn clematis. So I guess if I had a preference, I would go with the sweet autumn clematis over the silver lace vine. I think it would be a better plant for a landscape.
All right, Jim, you get the next picture. This is a viewer in Lincoln and moved into a new house. The owner stated that they had had difficulty with an insect infestation in a maple tree. They found 3 of them in the house, and he's afraid it's a borer. They want to know whether it's a maple borer beetle and what he should do about it.
Well, actually, that's I call it checkered beetle, and it's a predaceous beetle, and as larvae, they feed underneath the bark of trees that are, in question as far as their health goes, whether loose bark, and they feed on other borer types of insects that would be beneath that bark or in the wood as well. So that's a beneficial insect. I really can't address the borer issues for maples. If they suspect that there's some borer issues with the maples, look for those exit holes. Usually the month of May through June is the time to be applying some kind of a spray, whether it be permethrin or bifenthrin, with thorough coverage on the lower branches and that trunk. And that will help to prevent reinfestation. If you do that over a couple of seasons, hopefully that tree, if it's not in bad shape already, will recover pretty well.
Excellent, thanks, Jim. Okay, Lowell, this is annual weed time, apparently.
Yes.
With the weather. This is a picture that was sent in with little tiny blue flower with 4 petals, dinky, and I think that must be a dime next to that. They've seen this blooming for at least 2 or 3 weeks already. They want to know what it is and how you should control this, if any.
Yeah, this is one of the common winter annuals. I showed shepherd's purse earlier. This is one of the speedwells. It's a winter annual weed, just like the other ones. Where you're seeing it right now, it will produce seed. If you pick that little plant up, it's flowered within a few days after the flower. It will actually produce kind of a heart-shaped seed pod. And if you look at that, it only takes 7 to 10 days for those seeds to mature and drop out of there.
Whoa.
Yeah, it happens really, really fast. So where they have those plants this year, they'll have them in the fall. And if it's a real problem, they probably need to think about fall applications. Just something very simple like a 2,4-D is highly effective on those.
Or a hoe.
Or a hoe.
Small
or
spot.
A hoe. Yep.
Yeah, or enjoy it.
Yeah.
Maybe. Okay, Lauren, this is actually a follow-up question to one that you got last week, and it's from a different viewer. This is a viewer in Pisgah, Iowa, which is about 50 miles north of Council Bluffs, so they're probably in ice right now. She's wondering about the dead interior needles with good new growth, and says they have a Black Hill spruce that's exhibiting this behavior. 25 feet tall, 25 years old, but again, you see this a lot on other sorts of spruce as well. So
Pass.
Oh, you don't get to do that.
I don't get to pass now. This is Rhizosphaera needlecast, which is a common needlecast disease. And you can see in this picture actually the little bodies that we're looking at, the little specks. Those are actually some of the fruiting structures. So those needles that are affected inside, the older needles, will produce a lot of spores from these structures. There's a couple things with these diseases when we look at this. You know, any of our trees, when you have a significant problem with a foliar disease like Rhizosphaera, you can commit to a fungicide treatment strategy and try to do that for several years, and you may get that tree to recover. But these can be really difficult because many times the timing on that, you know, you may be off a little bit. Now, a recommendation on that would be somewhere in that mid-May, and then about 3 weeks later to make a fungicide application. But again, the problem is, you know, if weather seasons, if the cycles change a little bit and you're off, you could end up still having problems. I would make sure you're doing anything to open up the canopy to remove, you know, any damaged portions of the tree. Make sure you don't have irrigation systems that are going over the tree. Anything to try to get moisture, you know, get that tree to dry out, you know, particularly in the morning, so you don't have long dew periods that are going to favor disease development for that.
All right.
So very difficult to manage though.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. All right, Sarah, you get a picture too, and this is also ID. This is a viewer in Hastings. The tree is 50 feet tall, beautiful red flowers. Nobody seems to know what it is.
Well, this is a maple, and most likely it's a silver maple. And they do actually have very pretty flowers. Most people don't really notice them when they're blooming in the spring. But they are one of the first plants, or one of the first trees, I should say, to open those buds and to start to flower. So enjoy them while they're looking pretty like this, and before too long you're going to have some leaves coming on there too.
And helicopters.
And helicopters will be next.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Okay, Jim, no picture with this, but this is also a follow-up from last week.
Okay.
We talked about Boxelder bugs, and this viewer saw something strange on the windowsill. It was a Boxelder bug and had its big old proboscis stuck into a dead fly. Yeah, which sounds a little gross.
Maybe that's the only redeeming quality of a Boxelder bug.
It couldn't get a good
Those
picture,
flies.
so it didn't send us, but then saw another one a few days later and wondered what sort of cannibalistic behavior he had going on.
I just have to commend the viewer for the acute observational skills. That happens in the insect world. You know, they're not always like a Boxelder bug, for example. If it has need for moisture or nutrient, it'll feed on something else. And my guess is that was probably a cluster fly or phase fly that had survived the winter and then died on the windowsill as freshly dead. And the Boxelder bug, of course, being somewhat desiccated already, probably decided to poke in its straw and suck out whatever's moist there. And that's a, you know, survival mechanism. So it was very interesting.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Lowell, just a real quick question here. This viewer from Waverly wants to know, does it make a difference to purchase seed from a reputable source, or can you buy it pretty much anywhere and expect good seed?
Well, we always recommend buying certified seed, and having a tag on that so that you know what your germination is and what the what percentage of your seed, if it's a blend, is incredibly important for good germination and to avoid getting things like weed seed and off-type grasses in that mix.
Okay, thanks.
Well, what about some of these quick patch things that you see in the garden center? I know a lot of people are going to be, you know, trying this out, and it seems like some of those may have a whole mix of things in them a lot of times. Are those
They
good
do.
to use, or?
They, I think some of the seed in there is, it may burn out in the hot times of the year, and is not going to, long term, is not going to be as good as a certified seed on that. But if they want something very green very quickly, you know, they can think about it.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, guys. Sarah, we actually had a Facebook question come in from California.
Okay.
They want to know the conditions it takes to grow arugula and what causes it to bolt.
Well, arugula is a green, you know, like lettuce or mesclun or spinach, and it grows under somewhat similar conditions. So it's going to like cooler temperatures, not as cool as we're having today. But I mean, you know, 40s to 50s would be good for arugula. It's not going to do so great during the middle of the summer. Give it plenty of moisture, maybe a little bit of shade would be okay too. And bolting can either be triggered by too hot or too cold. So if we get a sudden spike in temperature, oftentimes you'll see the green type plants like arugula going to seed. And we may, if anybody had any early planted arugula in their garden already here in Nebraska, we may see some of that bolting from the cold temperatures that we're having now too in the next few weeks.
All right, you get the next set of pictures, Jim.
Okay.
This is Clover Mites, and the question from the viewer is they've heard of them. They don't really know what the big deal is or what they do. Why are they?
Well, it all depends on where you are in the landscape. Some people have terrible problems every year with clover mites, and other people don't so much. Clover mites are a general feeder out in the landscape on a number of different kinds of plants. But they'll come together toward late autumn, and they will congregate and hide up in or around the structure of the home. This time of year, they're a nuisance because it's warming up and they want to get out into the landscape again. They're in real high concentrations and they get in the home and they're crawling all over. And so some of them don't ever make it out. The others that are moving out in the landscape can actually damage the turf and any perennials or maybe annuals that were planted immediately there at this time of year. So it's a phenomenon that happens off and on. As far as numbers go, it can be high numbers some years and others not. So they're just a nuisance kind of a pest. Once they're out in the landscape, no big deal. So usually when people experience this kind of a problem, it's a good idea at least to try to treat the outside perimeter of the house. And bifenthrin is an insecticide miticide, that's bifenthrin. And that can be applied around the perimeter of the house and on the ornamentals and whatever out there to kill off the numbers and reduce the populations of them so it won't be likely to happen the following year.
All right, great, thanks, Jim. Okay, Lowell, yet one more weed.
Yeah, we're kind of going down the checklist here.
Yeah, blue flowering weed in the backyard, and we have a picture, and you actually brought some in.
Yeah.
I want to know what it is and what to do about it.
Okay, that is henbit, one of the most common winter annual weeds out there. It's a problem in turfs and areas that are left unmanaged. You'll actually see this if you drive through the country in the next few weeks. You will actually see fields turning purple, and that's henbit. It has that trumpet-shaped flower there. I think one thing that's really pretty interesting on this is if we can look on my thumbnail right there. That's actually, you can see the flowers on the plant. I just pulled this on my way into the studio this evening. And then I pulled some seeds out of the next bract or node down on this plant. So it's cold, it's April. This plant is literally just a couple days away from shedding seeds out there. Wow. So the management of this in the spring, we typically recommend herbicides in the fall, and we kind of back off that recommendation in the spring because once these plants hit reproductive stage, the herbicides just don't work as good on them. I would just kind of live with them now. I know folks are going to try to start targeting dandelions and so forth, and I would concentrate more on trying to control dandelions than some of these winter annuals with herbicides. We've actually kind of, the boat has sailed on a lot of these winter annuals at this point.
Great, thanks. All right, Lauren, a viewer has a question about old fruit mummies on a crabapple. Should they remove them, spray them? Are they going to be a source of disease inoculum?
This is kind of dependent on how much time the viewer has and what they would like to do, I guess, because it really is a source of inoculum, but I could tell you to pick them all off, and you will reduce inoculum, but you're probably not going to have any effect on disease development. So I don't know. I wouldn't worry too much about it. You're probably better off just going ahead and targeting a spray, developing a spray program. If it, is it a crabapple or
flowering?
Flowering crab.
So,
okay.
Yeah, not a fruit.
Yeah. So if they want to eliminate or reduce scab, if we have a wet spring, look at those applications. Here pretty soon, right when we just start to see those leaves starting to break out. That's when you want to protect those early leaves.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Sarah, we have several pruning of grape questions, a couple of them from the Netherlands
Wow.
and a couple from Nebraska. So we'll kind of start 1, 2, 3. The first is, can you prune the multiple old woody trunks of a grapevine, or just let them be since it's coming out of the ground in multiples?
You know, I guess I would tend to leave them. You know, when you're in a production system with grapes, oftentimes you'll have one main stem that's the stem that's going to have the fruit, and then sometimes growers will have a secondary stem so that if something happens to that main one, they have something they can trim it back to and allow it to keep growing. In more of a home garden situation, you know, it's okay if you have multiple trunks. So, you know, I guess I would tend to leave them.
All right, good, not damage the plant. And then the second question is to cover an arbor and get the grapes, should they really prune, and will it damage the plants if the leaves are already shooting out?
Usually the pruning is done more during the dormant season, so it would be better if you could do that in years to come. But if you have to do a little bit of pruning now, you know, it certainly isn't going to kill the plant. You won't want to trim as hard for this kind of situation as we would, again, in a commercial situation, because you still want to have some vines there and have some foliage that's going to cover the arbor. So I wouldn't follow a strict pruning program like you would, again, for commercial, but prune it down so that you're eliminating a lot of the smaller twigs and you're leaving mostly the larger stems with a few buds on those stems so that you can get some good new growth with good fruiting buds on them for this summer, and that'll help to provide you with those fruits you're looking for.
Okay, Jim, another set of pictures. This is fun. This viewer in Council Bluffs found 2 of these things in their barberry bushes, and they wonder what they are.
All right, it looks to me like it's the Chinese praying mantis egg case. And they will deposit their egg masses or egg cases in protected areas, of course, because there are eggs in there, and when it gets warm, probably more so toward the end of May, those egg cases will hatch out maybe 200 or 300 little cute little praying mantises, which will disperse out into the landscape. So if you have them there, keep them there, because they will provide a benefit in helping to control pest insects in the landscape and in the garden.
Good, excellent. All right, one more. You've actually talked about this one, but this is some pictures of its other life stages. Blooming white before the snow, and there we go. And then we have some seed head pictures, I think, too. So.
Yep, that is shepherd's purse, and that was the first sample I talked about on the show. That's a really good picture of the seed pods, and literally once it starts bolting, it will flower and put on seed pods in a week, and seed will mature very, very quickly out there. And that goes for all the winter annuals. Where you have them this year, you will have them this fall. They're very, very tiny when they germinate, and if you don't like them now, unfortunately, it's a bit of a plan ahead for a fall application to take care of them.
All right, thanks. All right, Lauren, a question about needle cast on spruce with some pictures. What is that exactly, and what do you do about it, and is this it?
Okay, needle cast diseases would be kind of like the Rhizosphaera needle cast that we talked about earlier. There's also another one we see in Nebraska too. When you see that first picture when there was a branch, that has me a little bit more concerned about canker or something that's affecting the whole branch. That one. Now the next picture, that looks more like needle cast to me, that picture where we've got the newer growth is not affected, the older growth is.
Okay.
And you have a disease there. It's not on the whole tree, it's just on a portion of the tree. Both of those, you know, like we talked about earlier, very difficult to control. Avoid overhead irrigation. Mid-May, you can use a fungicide, and then about 3 weeks later.
All right, thanks, Lauren.
You know, and I might just chime in on that, Kim, because there is a possibility that could just be some drought damage from last year, especially if that damage that you saw on that one branch in the first picture just showed up last fall. We're seeing a lot of that on spruces this year, and so if that's the case, then you know, fungicide application wouldn't help because it's not a disease; it's just an environmental response to last year's extreme summer.
All right, thanks, Sarah. You have a pruning question, actually, with a picture. This is a viewer that has she thinks about 4 roses in this big tangle. Wonders about pruning them now. Is that an okay thing to do?
Well, roses bloom on new wood. Quite a few of them do. So what I would probably do with this planting now is to come in and prune some of the heaviest, thickest canes all the way down to the ground and thin it out so that you have a more open planting there. Then if you have some tall canes that are still left, you can go ahead and trim those down so that they're within the right size that you're looking for. And then that should be a good way to get it into a better shape and a better form so that it can grow out and look pretty this year.
Okay, Jim, a question from Papillion. This is a viewer that wonders about whether Japanese beetle traps would work on a large linden tree.
Japanese beetle traps do work as far as collecting Japanese beetle because they have a real strong pheromone and a floral scent that really draws them. But if you have a high number of Japanese beetles in your area, which I suspect you do, it's not really going to make any kind of an impact. It's just going to be difficult to deal with Japanese beetles right now when their populations are building and they're just practically everywhere. So it comes to a matter of protecting the plant if you want to try to protect the plant. And how big is that?
Large.
That's large, so it doesn't seem like it's very practical.
Okay.
Foliar treatment with carbaryl or permethrin as you desire, which I suppose will be quite often during the Japanese beetle season, might help, but I don't see much sense in it.
All right. Lowell, how do you kill wild strawberries that have almost taken over the lawn?
It depends on how thick that actually is. Wild strawberries are very difficult to control, a perennial. Sequential applications with growth regulator herbicides that contain the active ingredient triclopyr are kind of a necessity to try to get it under control. And then think about, after you make an application, think about making the turf more competitive with the weed on that. So fertility, increased mowing height, etc.
All right, thank you. Lauren, is pine wilt related to little leaf disease, and can they occur together?
Little leaf disease of pine, I haven't really heard it referred to as that, but what I think that is mentioning is the Spheropsis or Diplodia tip blight, where it causes small needles in the growth. They could occur together, although pine wilt would be the one that'll kill the tree. So in any event, you could see them both, but most likely if the tree's dying, it's due to pine wilt.
All right, excellent. Sarah, a viewer with 2-year-old and 3-year-old Clematis, how do you know when to prune them? Or if?
Well, you look first of all at when they bloom, because most of the Clematis will bloom, well, I guess I can't really say that. Some bloom on old wood, some bloom on new wood. But generally speaking, you want to prune them after they're done blooming. So like the Sweet Autumn Clematis that we mentioned earlier in the show, usually what you do with that one is it blooms in the fall, and when it's done blooming and after it's lost its leaves, and it's a very rampant vine, so you cut it all the way down to the ground and then you let it grow back up the following year. Some of the Jackman type Clematis that you have the big flowers and they bloom all summer long, you don't really do a lot of pruning on those. You just trim off whatever's winter killed, and then you maybe thin them out a little bit from time to time. So look at when they're blooming and then kind of base your pruning on that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sarah. I know it's complicated to people to do that sometimes.